What's up guys, I'm Player 2 Jade and this is Affairs of the Court, Choice of Romance. Now, before I get started, I just wanted to say thank you to Clint Hurley, who is our newest subscriber. Thank you so much for commenting and subscribing, Clint. I also wanted to say thanks to you guys because we recently reached our, one of our videos actually has over 100 views at this point, and that's a lot more than I ever expected. Anyway, thank you guys so much for commenting, subscribing, and just thank you. That really means a lot to us. Alright, let's go ahead and get started here. When we last left off, Magdalena had just burst into our bedchamber after a night of partying, like fucking weirdos that we are. And we have gotten an invitation from both the king and the Mendoza to go out with them. And our options are, we just want Magdalena to go away, we want to go with the king, we want to just say, excellent. And then, de Mendoza's token. And then, how will I ever decide between the king and de Mendoza? It's so difficult, I feel torn. I think I'm just going to go with the Mary Sue-ish answer because, screw it, Mary Sue it up. How could you not? To be pursued by two such excellent men. Some women would dream of it, and yet to you it poses an impossible question. After dressing for the day, you leave your bedchamber to examine the tokens yourself. Your Aunt Leonor greets you with a smile as you enter the sitting room. Ah, Violetta, how good to see you this morning, after such successful time at the banquet. Carlos Torres has sent you a very nice scarf, imported silk no less, and an invitation to tea. I do hope you will accept. Ah, I had not heard of that token. Magdalena mentioned only the invitation from His Majesty and from the Mendoza. Leonor makes a face and waves her hand dismissively. You know children, they have childish ideas. But you are not a child any longer. You are a fine young woman, and you need to think like an adult. Romance is all very nice, but it does not put a fine roof over your head and give your children an inheritance of which you can be proud. If you want my advice, she says, continuing without waiting to hear if you do, forget about His Majesty and the Mendoza. It would all be very well to marry the king, but he is married already. And you are both death mages. You could never truly hope to marry him. Better to be married to a respectable gentleman than to be the amusement of even the king. As for the Mendoza, he can barely pay for his own needs. You would be embracing a life of suffering if you were to marry him. Torres may not be exciting, but he is wealthy, and would provide for you well. If you must think of romance, it is only sensible to wait until you are a wealthy widow. How do you respond to your aunt's opinion? Gratefully, thoughtfully, or sarcastically? Let's just go with sarcastically, because I don't want to lead her on. Thank you, Aunt Leonor. I know you always have my best interests at heart. Your uncle will also want to speak to you about this, but you should remember that sometimes his reach is greater than his grasp, eh? Grasp, not gasp. What do you do now? Let's go ask my uncle for advice. You rap politely on your Uncle Pedro's study. Come in, he calls out tersely. As you enter, he brightens, putting aside the quilt with which he has been writing, and stands up. Ah, Violetta, come in, come in. I was handling some of my correspondence, but I am more than happy to interrupt that for you. I want to ask your advice, Uncle. How should I decide among my suitors? Yes. You made quite the entrance at court. Quite the entrance. I would begin by saying that you simply must encourage His Majesty's interests. He is, after all, the king. You might manage to displace the current queen consort, but even if you cannot, better to be his lover than anyone else's wife. If he takes you on as a lover, you would have access to influences, riches, and power. How could you pass up an opportunity like that? You're right. Your uncle smiles at you. There's another reason I like you, Violetta. Unlike some of our family that I could name, you are sensible and willing to listen to reason. Not exactly reason, but, Your uncle continues speaking. Now, the king has every opportunity he could wish. If his interest in you is but passing, that would be understandable, and in no way a discredit to you. So you should keep your options open. The Mendoza is a lightweight. He is from a respectable family, but he has no wealth, no prospects, and nothing to offer. Put him from your mind. Now, turning your mind to Torres. There's a man you could do well with. He is barely an hidalgo, it is true, but he has made a fortune. His family will always be well provided for, and his contacts give him influence throughout the court. There would be no shame in a match with him. What do you do next? Let's go examine the gifts personally. The servants have arranged the invitations pleasingly on the sideboard. Each of your suitors has sent you a small gift along with the invitation. The king's gift is a beautiful arrangement of exotic flowers, surely imported at a great cost. While the arrangement is very tasteful, it shows all it shows all the signs of being the work of one of the same people who provided the flowers for the decorations in the palace. The king may have approved the flowers, but he certainly did no more than that. De Mendoza's poem is heartfelt, a little overwrought, and ever so slightly more risque in its imagery than really appropriate. He wrote it in his own hand. You are not certain whether to be pleased that he made corrections to the poem on the version he gave to you, or disapproving of his failure to prepare a clean copy. The poem itself is pleasing, but de Mendoza will never reach great fame as a poet. The silk scarf that Tourneys sent you is mostly notable for its extreme cost. It is not the sort of scarf you would normally wear, and is somewhat behind the times in fashion. And yet you could not help but notice just how well made it is, and of such expensive fabric and vibrant dyes. Tourneys must have surely spent a small fortune on it, whether because he always purchases the finest goods, or because he wanted to make a point of demonstrating the size of his fortune to you. I don't care for money, and if we want to do the best in the world and be a Mary Sue, we have to go for the king. You accept the king's invitation. The next day passes quickly in preparations. What do you wear? Attractive but sensible clothes? Wear the most attractive outfit? Dress scandalously? Let's go with attractive but sensible. Fine pavilions stand near the tourney grounds. Skilled grooms care for the beautiful coursers that participants will ride. You join the king's entourage as he approaches the tourney grounds. He waves his hand to you as his companions approach, and they break off their conversation, whether of great matters of state, or of trivialities, or of you cannot tell, and move away to give the two of you some privacy. We are most pleased that you agreed to accompany us, the king says as you approach. You curtsy deeply in response. I am honored to be invited, your majesty. Should I give him a different voice? I don't know. I never know with this stuff. I feel like my voice acting would be terrible. I pretty much just try to mimic the tone, but I don't really want to go all out and change my voice and make it like, we are pleased that you agreed to accompany us. Just because I feel like it sounds terrible. I used to be able to do a Mr. T impression when I was younger, but, I was really little. Probably do a really high-pitched voice, but I mean, it's a king. You'd expect a deep, booming voice. I'm sorry, I rambled. Where was I? You exchange pleasantries as you approach the royal pavilion. The marshal of the lists approaches, bowing deeply. Will you be jousting today, your majesty? The king nods. Indeed, we will take our turn on the lists. Of course, your majesties. I will give orders for your personal horse and staff to be made ready. The marshal turns to you. And you, my lady, I believe you are also a death mage, and thus suitable for the competition. Let's go with of course. Fuck it. Be brave. I will, you say to the marshal of the lists. The king raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. The marshal continues. Very good, my lady. Will you need us to provide you with a steed and staff? If you would be so good. Of course, my lady. The king discusses the various passes that you watch, while waiting for the marshal to call for the one of you to participate. It's quite pleasant, and the jesting is invigorating to watch. After the better part of an hour, a page from the marshal informs you that you should make yourself ready. Do we ask him for a token to adorn our staff? Do we simply ask him to wish us well? Or just don't ask for any public sign of favor? I'm going to say, just wish me well. Wizard's Joust. Hey, apparently we won already. Wow, Steam, way to give it away. We wish you a glorious victory. Indeed, we will do better. He gestures for one of his attendants to approach, and the attendant gives the king a set of ribbons in the royal colors. The king proffers the ribbons to you. Will you do us the honor of carrying our favor? You consent, and the king ties his ribbons onto your staff. You quickly ready yourself, and the Marshal of Lists has prepared a fine stallion for you, and a heavy ash staff through which you will channel your energies. You face off against Don Emilio de Fernandez, an hidalgo with a reputation as a skilled wizard. The Marshal raises a plain red flag, and you each salute the king and begin chanting the words of power to create your protective shields. The Marshal drops the flag, and you couch your staff, spurring your horse into a spirited charge at Don Emilio. As you approach 5 lengths, you shout words of power and focus all your magical energy through the staff at Don Emilio. Fire and raw magical energy erupt from your staff, a wave of power smashing into Don Emilio, sweeping aside his attack as if it were nothing and hurling him from his steed. He lands bruised and battered and rolls several times before coming to his knees and signaling that he yields. The Marshal swings his flag in your direction, marking your victory, and you ride back to the royal pavilion. Well done indeed, says the king with a broad smile. Rarely have we seen such a convincing victory. We salute you in your triumph. Thank you, your majesty. The king laughs. When we asked you to join us to watch the joust, we hardly expected that we would be watching you in the finest match. You rejoin the king in his box and spend the rest of the afternoon discussing, in detail, the joust. By ancient tradition, romance is a dance between the pursuer and the pursued, with the wealthier older partner seeking to impress the younger, more dependent partner. For the pursued to demonstrate her prowess in jousting is not the most typical way to pursue romance, but it seems to be working for you nonetheless. Blarg, I wish I had water. Your Aunt Leonora approaches you the following day. If you are quite done chasing after fantasies, there is still time to salvage things with Carlos de Torres. While your initial rejection may have put him off, I am certain that I could arrange an invitation to tea on another day. The whole family depends on marrying you well, Violeta, and Don Carlos is your only good chance. Please tell me you will at least go to tea. How bad could one afternoon be? She looks both relieved and irritated. I'm glad you are not throwing away this opportunity, though I do wish you would be more mature about it. After all, the whole family is depending on you. A favorable match could resolve all our problems. Think of Magdalena's future, even if you will not think of your own. I will contact Don Carlos and see about arranging a time for tea. Your Aunt Leonor contacts Carlos Torres. Sure enough, she is able to arrange for a second invitation to tea. Later that week, you dress in fine but not overly fancy clothes and travel across town to Torres' home, accompanied by your Aunt Leonor as a chaperone. As you approach Torres' mansion, you realize that he's even wealthier than you had imagined. Even located near the heart of Orovilla, his home is palatial, with its own gardens attached. Torres is in all likelihood wealthier than all but the greatest grandes. Sharply appointed servants show you into the plush sitting room, decorated with mahogany furniture and gorgeous rugs imported at impossible expense from far-off lands. As soon as you enter, a servant carries in a solid gold tea service. Torres stands to greet you, a smile on his face. I am so glad that you could join me. Please, have a seat. He gestures at a gorgeous velvet-covered chair. A servant stands nearby, apparently to attend to any needs or requests you might have. You could get used to this. Tea is pleasant, but no more than that. As before, you feel no connection with Torres. He makes his interests apparent, complimenting you on your appearance, your conversation, and your family. He is solicitous, but somewhat stiff, frequently interrupts the tea to handle minor matters of business brought to him by one of the clerks. You have little doubt that after a few more occasions with him, you could extract a marriage proposal, if you wish. And yet, is that all your season is to offer? Things are going according to plan. You continue a pleasant if slightly boring tea. At least if you marry Torres, you will have plenty of money with which to seek diversions, just as well, because he will not provide you with any. At the end of the afternoon, you take your leave. He affectionately yet formally makes his goodbyes. As your carriage takes you back to your uncle's room at the palace, Aunt Leonor leans in and whispers excitedly. He said he hoped to call upon your uncle soon, with just a little more effort. I think you can expect a proposal. Excellent. Your plans are developing perfectly. Most of the events you attend as part of the season are purely social events, often with a form of entertainment included. Every so often, however, a more substantial event occurs at court. These are the sort of events that you should attend so that you can see and be seen, but at which the king and his advisers, most notably Luis de Vega, perform the actual business of ruling Iberia. On a hot summer day, the king's court will meet to discuss some delicate matters with the recently arrived ambassador of the neighboring country, Sarra. But before you begin the process of dressing for court, one of the servants approaches you. Don Gabriel de Mendoza wishes to call upon you, my lady. De Mendoza waits for you in the parlor. Ah, Doña Violeta, I am so glad to see you, he begins. While his greeting is warm, he seems distracted. I wish I had time for a purely social call today, but I need to speak to you about the meeting of the King's Court. You understand the importance of this issue, I trust. Now, how well do we know the court? Are we well informed? Do we know the basics, or do we know everything? I'm going to say we know everything. We know everything. I swear. Somehow. Oh, boy. Okay. I'm not used to talking this much. Or this long. Or without any response. So I'm sorry if I sound very weird. For many years, the border between the southern edge of Iberia and the neighboring country of Sarra has been uneasy. Diplomats drew the border at the end of the last major war between two realms, nearly a generation ago. And nobles on both sides of the border resent the loss of lands as they viewed as theirs. For years, Sarra has accused the border lords of Iberia of harboring bandits, a charge that is probably true, although Sarra also probably blames some indigenous banditry on its neighbors across the border. Recently, Sarra has claimed that the banditry has increased. In response, there have been several punitive actions in which Sarian troops have crossed the border and raided the manors, fields, and villages of the border lords. As best you can tell, they've been more interested in attacking your richest targets than getting revenge on the most likely offenders. The issue divides the nobility of Iberia as well. The border lords are obviously self-interested, but many other members of the nobility want the king to take firm action against Sarra. For nobles without much in the way of wealth or land, such as Gabriel de Mendoza or your own family, action against Sarra could offer the possibility of new lands to plunder. Conversely, nobles that have extensive interest in trade, as well as the nouveau riche such as Carlos Torres, could stand to lose a fortune if the king disrupts trade with Sarra. The merchant class wants an example made out of the border lords to secure smooth relations with Sarra. And then there are courtiers like Luis de Vega, who want to strengthen the crown. They want the king to seize land and assets from both the border lords and Sarra. All this makes for a difficult and sticky situation. The countries are of roughly comparable power, although strangely Sarra has neither death nor life mages. It has mages with strange powers of transportation, said to be capable of speeding the travel of an army or even teleporting it across a country. A war could be potentially destructive for both sides, yet how can Iberia tolerate an enemy army crossing its borders? The king will have to handle the situation adroitly when he receives the ambassador. As you understand, continues de Mendoza, honor demands that the king act firmly against Sarra. We cannot tolerate their troops crossing the border and attacking us. And of course, if the king takes action, that will create opportunities for those of us who are not blessed with the lands and holdings of our ancestors. The king will make the final decision, but he can be swayed in the opinions of the nobles of his court. I hope that I can count on you to speak out against Sarra, and in defense of the border lords. Let's go with, I need to speak with my uncle and aunt first, but I personally support you. I understand, but I beg of you, do not let the caution of the older generation lead you away from saying what you know to be true and aiding Iberia in what you know to be right. I wish I could tarry with you, but I must speak with others of the matter at the court. You have a moment to think as you begin your preparations. People say things all the time to one member of the court faction while thinking another. What do you actually think? So, do we need to impress other people? Do we want war? No, we don't want war. We don't want the king to punish them. I'm thinking, peaceful conflict resolution would be the best. However, this could be a great opportunity for the king. But I'm gonna go with peace. A war would leave many of the people of both countries dead. It would also horribly damage the import trade that runs through Sareth, perhaps even cutting off the supply of goods from far-off lands altogether. However, His Majesty responds, he must be careful to avoid allowing the situation to spiral out of hand. When you arrive at the grand audience, the chamber when you arrive at the grand audience chamber where the king will receive the ambassador and discuss matters, a large number of courtiers and interested parties have gathered. The room is filled with the buzz of quiet conversation. Certain people, including the king's advisor, Luis de Vega, actively work the room, although you cannot tell at a glance whether they seek to measure or to influence opinion. Others, including Carlos Torres, Gabriel de Mendoza, and the queen's consort's influential older sister, Duquesa Constanza de Aguilar, stand around with coteries? I don't know that word. Coteries. I need to look that one up. I'll look it up later. Of their allies and associates. Those worthies eagerly seek out the opportunity to bend the ear of the Vega and others who might sway the king, but they stay among friends as they do so. Let's sway the opinion of the room. Or should we determine the positions? Let's determine the positions. Understanding the positions of the factions within the court is at least as important as understanding the nature of the dispute. One response might be better in principle, but if popular will constrains the king to reject it, it would hardly be of any value. And any positions you express will make both allies and enemies. You spend much of your next 2 hours carefully listening, careful to draw out others' beliefs without revealing your own. Some positions are obvious. As you already knew, Gabriel de Mendoza and many of the other young nobles of the court want a vigorous response against Sarah to protect Iberia's prestige, and possibly in the hopes of capturing land which the king could carve out new noble estates. The border lords, of course, have the same basic position, but they are more concerned with protecting their own status and assets than with defending Iberia's prestige. Carlos Torres and others who depend on trade for their prosperity want peace with Sarah, and if that peace must be purchased with the heads of some border lords, so be it. The positions of other nobles are less clear. Further nuances, such as the position of Duquesa de Aguilar and Don Luis de Vega, elude your understanding. You're not the only person who understands the value of listening carefully and speaking strategically. Does this change your position? No. And why should it? The courtiers have had a couple hours to discuss the matters in politic. A chamberlain slams the butt of a ceremonial mace into the ground 3 times. My lords, ladies, and gentles, his Majesty the King. The room falls silent as the courtiers respectfully drop to their knees in homage to the king. The king gestures for them to rise. We appreciate your attendance upon us in this difficult hour. Any who would wish to petition the crown may do so. You recognize the words as a traditional formula, part of the unwritten right of the nobility to advise the king on matters of the state. Shouldn't that be advise with an S? I don't know. Following the traditional protocols, some of the hidalgos in the room step forward and kneel again, without waiting to be recognized. Some of the grandes signal their desire to speak by removing their hats without kneeling, while the greatest nobles can be recognized to speak by simply touching their hats. The king will not be bound by the sentiments of the courts, but he will surely pay attention. The kings who ignore the wills of their nobles too often face rebellions, or at least vassals who do little to support the crown. How do we influence the king's decision? A speech and talk to many people? Just a public speech? Just making quiet comments? Or do we just leave no sign of our involvement? I'm going to say no sign of our involvement because we don't want to get in trouble later on. A nudge here, a whisper there, it's fine. You try to gently adjust the views of the courtiers around you, but at first you are settled to the point of being imperceptible. You don't have the finesse to handle something like this well. As it becomes obvious that you are having no effect on the court's opinions, you become a little more direct, and the most perceptive people in the court see what you are attempting. You still fail to accomplish anything. That could have gone better. As the speechifying draws to a close. Speechifying? Really? Okay. Draws to a close. The king again resorts to the traditional formula. We thank you for the advice you have offered us, and now we would hear the words of the representative of our cousin, the Queen of Sarah. He gestures to the chamberlain, who in turn signals the guards and announces as the door swing opens. His Excellence, the ambassador and minister plenipotentiary of Sara. The ambassador sweeps in, dressed formally in the slightly exotic but still recognizable styles of Sara, and bows before the king. Your Majesty, on behalf of the Queen of Sara, I bring greetings and salutations. After the appropriate polite exchanges conclude, the ambassador presents his argument. He complains bitterly about the depredations of the bandits, while denying any misconduct on the part of Sara. He does not make a formal request, but the implication is clear. Iberia ought to punish the border lords and make reparations to Sara. The king nods in acknowledgment of the ambassador's statement. He listens to De Vega for a moment as his adviser whispers in his ear. Finally, for the first time on this day, the king gives a serious speech describing his position. We understand the arguments on all sides. First, let us address Sara. Sara's recent conduct tries our patience. Despite any provocation, they had no justification for crossing our border in force. We must demand redress for such an infringement on of our sovereign rights. We shall make Sara pay in kind for their offense. All the same, we understand the importance of avoiding war. The years of peace have been good to both our realms, and we will not do anything that threatens that peace. Don Gabriel de Mendoza, the border lords, and the young firebrands of the court whisper among themselves in response to the king's statement. They seem satisfied, if not overjoyed. In contrast, while Luis de Vega keeps his own counsel, he cannot suppress a satisfied smile as the king finishes his speech. Don Carlos Torres and his allies, however, are concerned and worried. As for the border lords, we are displeased with our vassals. We do not believe that our vassals would engage in banditry, but they have abetted it. This must come to an end. The border lords must pay a price that will remind them to never transgress in such a way. All of the border lords will pay a heavy fine to the crown, and the worst offenders must forfeit some of their lands again. As well, we know that it is hard to see lands that have been in families for generations turned over to the crown, but such is the price of disobedience. The border lords flinch as the king announces this heavy punishment. To lose land, and likely the best of their lands, is one of the greatest fears of any noble family. But while they are angry and upset, the court as a whole accepts the king's statement with equanimity. The allies of the border lords, including the Duquesa de Aguilar and Don Gabriel de Mendoza, are somewhat unhappy, but nothing more. Don Luis de Vega nods in satisfaction, pleased at the king's success in pulling more power and influence to the crown, and Don Carlos Torres is pleased to see the border lords punished. Okay. The king finishes his speech with the royal position cleared. The socially appropriate thing to do would simply fall in line behind the king. Nonetheless, there's still opportunity to make one last speech to change his mind. We don't want to change his mind. We're fine with that. I am happy with the current outcome. After all of the speech is finished, the king makes a final formulaic speech, and the court comes to a close. The final effect of the king's decision takes time to unfold. The king orders limited retribution on Sara, seizes a few highly disputed tracts of land, but he is careful to prevent atrocities or random pillaging. Things are touch and go for a while, but after some careful diplomacy, open warfare is averted, and Iberia ends up profiting handsomely from the campaign. The king punishes the border lords with a firm but measured hand. The border lords grumble, but none of them are willing to rebel openly. And what other option do they have? The king and his close allies benefit greatly from the punishment, while no one border lord loses too much. In the aggregate, the forfeitures are quite substantial. Okay. So, the season's coming to an end, and we're standing in front of a great mirror. We dress in a gown of silvery silk, and not around our throat, a scarf the color of our eyes. We look critically at our reflection and are pleased with the effect. Magdalena brushes our hair and arranges it nicely, and as a final touch, you pin a single rose to your gown, where it is almost hidden by the folds of the scarf. By old tradition, the grand ball marks the occasion where young women such as yourself may give a rose to the suitor whom she prefers above all others. Your aunt expects you to give it to Torres. Magdalena wants to give it to Gabriel, or wants you to do it, and you think you should give it to the king. Okay. You thought the season's smaller parties were splendid, but they fade into unimportance as soon as you enter the great hall. Ropes of sweet-smelling white flowers hang from every structure capable of supporting them. Enough torches are lit to bring the illusion of daylight to the evening. The tables groan under the weight of the food and drink. Many people within the ballroom shun you, and you hear some of them gossiping about you when they think you are out of earshot. Your reputation has turned the most respectable people against you. Torres brings you a cup of wine at once, and guides you to a seat where he can see all that is happening in the room, and everyone can see the two of you. He is anxious for your comfort, checking to see that you are not too warm nor sitting in a draught, and have wine and sweetmeats and everything you could want. I like to see you smile, he says, leaning over you. I consider it my honor to ensure your happiness. Do we give him the rose? Nah. You're very kind, you say to Don Carlos. The musicians strike up the song, and the Mendoza appears to your side as if from thin air. Good evening, Don Carlos, he says politely, and then with more enthusiasm. Doña Violeta, would you do me the honor of dancing with me? If not exactly a breach of etiquette, but it is close. Torres' face flushes before you can say either yes or no. The Mendoza seizes your hand and pulls you to your feet. He whirls you into your dance. This is not the way things are done, you say, perhaps teasingly, perhaps reprovingly. We can choose to change the way things are done. Do we give him the rose? No. As you swing among other young ladies and gentlemen, you suddenly feel a hand on your shoulder. You turn and look up into the face of the king. Doña Violeta, he says, would you grant us the pleasure of the dance? He stretches out his hand, and the other dancers fall aside to give you room. He is by far the most graceful person you have ever danced with. He moves easily and is light on his feet. His eyes sparkle as though he is genuinely enjoying himself. We have never, he murmurs into your ear, danced with so lovely a lady. Your Majesty is too kind, you say. The dance comes to an end, and the king inclines his head to you in thanks. Let's give him the rose! Your Majesty has honored me, you say. May I give a small token to the finest dancer and handsomest gentleman in the room? You unpin the rose and hold it out to him. The entire court watching. You hear a hiss of surprise from some in the crowd. You see the queen consort watching. Lips tight. A charming token, the king says, from a charming young woman. We thank you. Later that night, after the ball has been over some time, your uncle and aunt have retired, and you are telling Magdalena all about your evening's adventure. A tap comes to your door. It is a servant, eyes deferentially cast down. His Majesty bids you to attend him if you are not too tired. The invitation did say if you are not too tired. There is a way out. Do we go? I mean, fuck it. Do we sleep with him or not? I guess. Fuck it. Fuck it. Why not? We'll see where it goes. The king is alone in the outer room of his great suite. No one attends him, and with a wave of his hand, he dismisses the servant who conducted you here. Doña Violeta, he says, come and take a cup of wine with me. You sit, and the king sits very closely beside you. The drink is the most delicious... Blarg, I botched that all up. You drink the most delicious wine you have ever tasted, and listen to the king as he talks to you. He speaks of new amusements being planned for the court, of poets and musicians who are coming to perform. He quotes, from memory, a poem about love. He wears a plain robe instead of his court finery, but somehow it only makes him look handsomer in the firelight. It emphasizes that good looks lie in his skin and bones, not his fancy clothes. You listen earnestly, you laugh at his witty remarks, and you let him take your hand. Then he leans in and kisses you. Will you allow him? Yeah, fuck it. You allow the kiss, and then you return it. The king stands and takes both of your hands and draws you into his bedroom. The night that follows surpasses even your wildest dreams. In the morning, the servant takes you back to your room. Perhaps unfortunately, your aunt has risen early, and so before an hour has passed, all three of your family members knew where you spent the night. Before the day has passed, the news has whispered its way all through the court. And I am going to leave it here. Thank you so much for watching. Links are in the description. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you would be so kind, I recently got Stardew Valley from a friend who bought it for me, who really wants me to play it. And I was wondering if, you guys would like to see that. If you do, please let me know. If you don't, I'll still probably end up maybe making one video on it and then see how that goes. Because I really do want to watch it. I just want to know if you guys want to see my very first introduction to it, or if you would like me to play it a little and then maybe start a new version when I have a little more knowledge of it so I don't suck balls. Anyway, thank you so much. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.